Hello, welcome to today's Work-Based Learning Collaborative Series webinar. My name is Veronica Newton. I'm with the Agency of Education, and I will be facilitating this webinar today along with Michael Brownstein, who's with the Center for Collaborative Education. Next slide, please. This webinar is designed to provide time to further collaborate with our colleagues and share promising practices around work-based learning programs across the state. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Vermont Agency of Education and the Vermont Professional Learning Network. This session is being recorded, and a link of the recording will be sent to the entire cohort via email. Today's session presenters are, we have Ken Cadow, Director of Career and Workforce Pathways at Randolph High School, Ellen Berrings, Employment Specialist and the Advisory and Personalized Learning Planning Coordinator at Harwood Union High School, as well as Rachel Potts, the Internship Coordinator and Employment Specialist at Harwood Union High School. The session presenters today have taken innovative strides in developing, implementing, and sustaining work-based learning programs to align with Act 77's initiatives, meet the demands of Vermont's economic and workforce development needs, and provide opportunities for all learners to achieve post-secondary readiness. At the heart of each of these innovations is a commitment to providing equitable access to high-quality educational experiences that acknowledge individual goals, learning styles, and abilities. Next slide. The purpose. So today's purpose is to advance the sharing of effective practices around work-based learning programs in Vermont and to collectively brainstorm issues regarding education and workforce relationships. So today's participants will acquire strategies and processes from their colleagues around implementing work-based learning experiences in a proficiency-based system. And also, towards the end of the webinar, we will collectively generate a list of questions for employers and Department of Labor personnel to be addressed at the March regional meetings. Next slide. Sharing effective practices. So today's presentations are focused on effective practices, and each presentation will be about 10 minutes in length with 5 minutes for questions and answers. You will have an opportunity to ask questions via the chat box throughout the webinar, and Michael will be fielding these questions and providing the questions as you present them into the chat box after each of the presentations. So now we're going to hear from Ken Cadow, Ken, Director of Career and Workforce Pathways at Randolph High School. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
One of the questions that comes up a lot at our workplace or work-based learning gatherings is how students can meet PBGRs through work-based learning experiences and not just habits. And another question that comes up is, how can we make work-based learning available to more students? And the questions are intertwined. In order to make the work-based learning opportunities available to all of the students, we have to make sure that it's not just run really as an extra, as an extra or a special. Fortunately, if the school's PBGRs or a school's PBGRs are relevant to the working world. If we don't find that they're relevant to the working world, I think we need to ask our schools to reframe them. Next slide, Michael. So this is the letter is sort of the front page of a deployed classroom, which is a model we've created here at Randolph. We have to rise to the call for career education to spill more fully into general ed. This is how we can also ensure that kids keep getting the exposure to the big picture questions and complex answers. So big picture. In other words, how do we think about something whole, not just building technical skills, but how does it fit into the broader world that we're graduating our kids into? So this is the syllabus letterhead for Water Management, Public Policy, and Practicality, which is a deployed classroom answering the question, really, how do we deal with water? We consider, well, what careers does this class lead to? Career college pathways you'll see in the gray box: civil engineering, environmental science, public policy, and career pathways. In other words, for kids who might not want to go on to college, but may want to go up to learn bits and pieces, say through gaining credentials, or just on the job learning, for say the student who wants to kind of quit school today and go work for his uncle's construction company or drive the bulldozer. Again, what I'm looking at is trying to make this accessible and interesting to 100% of our students. So career pathways would be construction, public works and transportation, agriculture, forestry. I won't get too into detail, but about the course itself, but anybody who's interested in this, Veronica's got copies of the syllabi that we can share. So next slide, Michael. So when a gen ed teacher load should be 15 to 20 kids with a class totaling maybe 80 to 100 kids, efficiency becomes a real issue. So how do we enable gen ed teachers of content to be part of work-based learning? Basically, we've got to continue to batch process if we want, which is a horrible way, really, of phrasing what the classroom is. But that's what I'm using. Next slide, Michael. That's really tough. 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. For a lot of our students, those are the years that are the kind of get all the gen ed stuff out of your way so you can take advantage of flexible pathways. The deployed classroom is sort of a way to connect those graduation standards that most high schools have sort of defined as a minimum to the students who really are chomping at the bit to take advantage of flexible pathways. So too often, failure is the admissions requirement for a lot of our students. In other words, we've tried everything else in the classroom, now we're going to let them loose. That's hardly a great way to send student ambassadors out into the community. So again, the deployed classroom is a model for that. Next slide, Michael. PBGRs can be the answer, should be the answer. We've got a picture here of two students, one of whom is very interested in going to college, and one isn't. This was a class of 14 kids overall, but both working side by side like they will be in the working world someday. And they're with a field expert taking apart a mold at a manufacturing plant. And this was part of an engineering design requirement standard that we have as a graduation standard at our school. So deployed classrooms reach 100% of our kids because all students can gain capacity in content standards. I've had students enjoy this approach who went on to an Ivy League school, and also kids who wrapped this up in the next semester were old enough to do a paid work-based learning experience and then went on after graduation to a post-secondary paid apprenticeship at the school, at the workplace with nighttime school included. So also this allows me to assess workplace skills. Another question that comes up often is how do we assess whether our students are ready to be sent out into the working world? Well, we could accompany them. This allows me or a designated teacher from our school to accompany the kids to the workplace and talk to them about communication styles, dress, all of that stuff. It also enables me as an educator to talk about our graduation standards in front of workplace people so that we're bridging that communication gap that I think, PBGRs implemented poorly can become more of a silo rather than an opportunity to bridge the gap between education and the workplace. Another thing is that these kids are in a manufacturing environment around heavy-duty machines that, Fair Labor Standards Act type stuff would be a violation if it wasn't a series of field trips. But this is, so it's covered by school insurance. And one class explores between 25 to 64 careers in a semester, which is effectively, 64 times 15 job shadows. It's an incredibly efficient way to get the kids exposed to human resources, marketing, mechanical engineering, computer system or design, a whole lot of things. And there's flexibility here to broaden the experience to make other standards relevant. All right, that was my longest slide. Next one, Michael, please. So the student here is pursuing the essential question from the manufacturing entrepreneurship deployed classroom, which is how does a company take an idea and turn it into a profitable, reliable, mass-producible product? And the answer of this develops a narrative that students construct during the semester as they come to know the different careers involved in how that company achieves that. Next slide, Michael. Great. How often do you get a high school kid to willingly put on a hairnet? So what these kids are doing here is really looking at the scientific process of scientific injection molding and learning to focus, to isolate variables and understand understand how some variables affect others. And they were part of a sim validation study, which we took this learning real life, real world rather, application and then brought it back to the classroom. One thing I'll say about the deployed classrooms is on Monday, or at least one day during the week, I go over content with the students, prepare them for what's coming next, and I work with our engineering teacher to make sure that we're using all the right terminology. Okay, next slide, Michael, please. Again, the students took a lot of what they learned on the site. They were involved in a number of quality assurance labs. And then in order to meet another science standard here at Randolph Union High School, they conduct a lab that basically, they took a product and made some changes in order to improve it. And then the lab, the hypothesis is effectively, this product is better than the old one, and they designed a series of tests to make sure that the product is in fact better than the old one. And these guys did a friction lab, which was actually the AP Physics lab last year on the AP test. Okay, next slide, Michael. So lots of logistics and challenges to this. If it's worth doing, though, it's doable. And Randolph Union's schedule has changed 3 times since I started the deployed classroom with manufacturing. That was our first one. We've always found a way. I'd say you need, generally speaking, a 75-minute block of time. There was one year where we had to use bag lunches. The kids got bag lunches. We hopped on the bus. And then, so they basically, lunchtime had to be included in their learning. Also, the financing, $1,800 over 32 field trips, 6, many sort of job shadows, if you look at it that way. It's money well worth spent, because I would say probably half the students are students we end up chasing in our halls and are so engaged at the job site and getting and also meeting the requirements for some standards. Okay, next slide, Michael. And this is the syllabus for the deployed classroom for entrepreneurship and manufacturing. This is so I work very closely with our with companies. I worked for the manufacturing class with LED Dynamics, Gifford Hospital, Vermont Technical College, and I think I already said GW Plastics, but we have field trips to 4 different locations. And it's quite a bit of scheduling. but I find our community partners to be incredibly reliable and remarkably willing to buy in and support our work. All right. I would say, again, the essential question is absolutely key so that a narrative can unfold. Next question, Michael, or next slide, sorry. A couple more classrooms we've got. We're piloting right now, careers in care. I think the state of Vermont has forecast a real dearth in healthcare and elder care in the next 10 years, and in fact happening already. We have students, just 4 right now, we're just piloting it, but students meeting standards in biological sciences and also social studies from C3. I took human patterns. We're looking at the economics of elder care also. The students hop in a bus or actually in the teacher's car, and he's reimbursed, to go to a number of some assisted living facilities in the community. And that's proving to be really popular. Again, a great blend of students. And then also Vermont Food Systems, we're working closely with folks on the slide there to really help me identify community partners and why reinvent the wheel. So there are there's a whole lot of work that's been done with school curricula to help students explore jobs in agriculture. So that's one we'll be offering starting next year, 2018, and students will meet English, social studies, and science standards as we look at food from germination all the way through to consumption and then decomposition. All right, next slide, Michael. How do the school system support this? We have in science, math, and English, and social studies, I'm still depending on a volunteer, but science, math, English, art, and phys ed, we have teachers who have 0.2 FTE dedicated to supporting independent students. That comes in really handy, especially say in an engineering course where a student is very engaged in that, but doing poorly in English actually can meet standards by tying the work that he's doing, say a persuasive essay on why the new product is better than the old one, by writing a persuasive essay with the English teacher as part of the deployed classroom experience. Another thing that's enormously helpful for me is available busing with minimal paperwork, and I can touch on how we've arranged for that. And aligning independent learning with standards, standard-based graduation. So what I won't do is I won't let any work-based learning experience or independent or ILO fly unless it's tied to our graduation standards, and that's not just habits but actual content. And that really forces the issue of relevance throughout the school. So that's what I've got.
Ken, I have a couple of questions for you. How did you decide what deployed classrooms would be offered in your school?
Well, definitely looking at local resources, what we've got around here. The water management one, actually, that happened because I was out on the backfield and the town wastewater treatment plant was putting in a new pipe, and I went out and talked. I spoke with a woman, and she said, "Man, we're hiring." So that turned into the whole Act 64, exploring Vermont's Clean Water Act through deployed classroom. That's part of it. It's also looking at Vermont Department of Labor sort of forecasts and needs. The Vermont Talent Pipeline Management Network, the work that's happening there. Basically, just kind of keeping my ear to the ground and seeing what's needed.
What feedback have you received from students who've gone through the deployed classroom?
Generally great. We've had most students, or many students, have asked if they can take it again. So almost every student who's taken one wants to know what the next ones are that we're offering. And again, that's coming from students who really are generally disengaged to students who are extremely engaged in their traditional classes.
I have a question here. Should each high school have a full-time staff member whose sole job is the work-based learning?
I would wholeheartedly say yes. I think that and that's actually a pretty small portion of what I do, but I think yes. It's, you know, I think one of the things that we could benefit from is really looking at, education can be pretty siloed. I think one of the ways in which we're most harshly judged is test scores. Getting our students out there with the incredible quality teachers that we've got, it's such a much better way to present ourselves.
Finally, the last question is, are there specific department teachers assigned to the deployed classrooms, such as science, math, social studies, or are there students gathering evidence of how they're demonstrating proficiencies in designated PBGRs to teachers outside the course?
It's kind of both. That's a great question. So yes, I co-teach. I co-teach the water management course and the manufacturing course with a science teacher. For students who also need an English credit through that, that student will work with an English teacher who may not accompany us, but but has built into their scheduling and their student load. And that's a really important thing to bring up, is that teachers who work, voluntarily or whether it's part of their load should have these students put on their roster, because otherwise it doesn't count toward their student load. So it looks like they're actually teaching fewer students than they are.
I had one more question snuck in. What's been the percentage of students who've continued through this career path that they've done through the deployed class?
We have had, let's see, as a percentage, so I tallied it. Let's see, we've had just under 100 kids go through the manufacturing program. And 7 of them we have 7 students now who are studying mechanical engineering. I have 5 students, former grads, or former students who did this deployed classroom, who are now actually working at GW Plastics, and a couple of kids who are still juniors who are very interested in civil engineering, that want to go to school for civil engineering when they graduate. So it's pretty, it's still pretty new, but I would, I think it's around 10%. But again, it's a little bit hard to say, because there are some students who've discovered, that they might be good human resources directors, which are kind of the guidance counselors of the working world. So it's an exposure to a lot of other fields.
Great, thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to give Ellen Berrings and Rachel Potts an opportunity to explain the work they're doing at Harwood Union.
Hi, so this is Ellen, and Rachel is beside me. So we are happy to share a model we've been working with and updating over the last 20 plus years at Harwood. We've been refining our work to align with Act 77 in a way that supports students to attain learning proficiencies through work-based learning opportunities. And Act 77 has really blown open the doors for our work in developing a clear path for students to connect authentic community-based learning with our graduation expectations. And it's really increased the number of students that are engaged in this process. Next slide, please. Great. So again, my name is Rachel Potts, and I'm just going to take a moment to talk a little bit about our program. So in 9th grade, all students take personal and future exploration here at Harwood, which really serves as an introduction to flexible pathways, as well as providing an in-depth opportunity to create their personalized learning plans. So students are required to participate in a job shadow or a career lab. So that's an opportunity for community members and professionals to come inside our building and kind of talk to students about their career paths. So they do that in addition to career research. So this class is really the catalyst for future work with Ellen and me in the Next Step program. And throughout their time here at Harwood, we encourage all students to really take advantage of the opportunities we have here at Next Step. So for the purposes of this webinar, Ellen and I will really be focusing in on community-based independent studies and internships to meet graduation expectations given the proficiency-based system. So we are working on connecting employment opportunities also to meet content-based proficiencies. So we're kind of in the process of that right now. We have our hands in two worlds with our class of 2020 and below in the proficiency-based system. So another element of Next Step is our work with the transition program. So we really have designed a program to support students on IEPs to ensure equitable access to flexible pathways as well. Next slide, please. So Ellen's going to kind of explain a little bit about our metaphor for looking at these programs. So in thinking about doing a webinar, we wanted to kind of talk about the ingredients that we have. So we kind of thought maybe we should use a recipe as a metaphor. So I apologize if anybody hates metaphors. In the ingredients that we're thinking about are the essential components that are necessary to combine in order to lead to successful attainment of the proficiencies through these community-based opportunities. So as with all recipes, there can be a level of creativity so that we can personalize the outcomes, but we ensure that the necessary ingredients are available. So as far as an internship is concerned, the necessary ingredients that we kind of looked at are, an interested student. So sometimes the students come to us through their school counselors, and other times they're just knocking on our door, interested in learning more about what kind of programs or what kind of opportunities that are at Next Step. Also for an internship, I am the internship coordinator here, but Ellen also does some groundwork with students to develop opportunities. The internship is obviously really important to have, the internship site, along with the mentor. Sometimes students kind of come in with a connection, a family friend that might be a perfect match for an internship mentor, while other times we're doing a bit of research and potential job shadowing before we make that match. So we also have clearly defined proficiencies and performance indicators in mind, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we're meeting with content area teachers here at Harwood to discuss those proficiencies. And at Harwood, we actually have a member, and each department is assigned to flexible pathways. So if we've got a student interested in doing independent studies or internships or online classes, they've got a content area teacher in that subject area that they can go to as their point person and help them guide them through assessing and attaining those proficiencies. So we've also have clearly defined goals and action steps, an internship plan that's aligned with performance indicators. It's really important for students to also have a flexible schedule. Our schedule right now, we're on an A-B kind of setup, so students will often work with their school counselors to set up either an A or a B day where they might have an entire afternoon to go to an internship site. Transportation is always an issue, and we usually have juniors and seniors who are interested in internship opportunities because they have more accessibility to transportation. But being in a rural area and we don't have access to public transport, it's a big equity issue for us here. So we do try to work around that, and we've got some opportunities to take advantage if the students are on an IEP, but that can be difficult at times. Also, it's important to have ongoing reflection and assessment. So we've got students who are logging not only their time, their experience, but really thinking deeply about what they're learning at their internship site. In addition, I've got reflections coming in from mentors too that students can process. And then we've got final evidence. That's the final project at the end of their internship that kind of really takes into consideration all of their learning up to that point. Next slide. So directions. So it's important that we mix the students with the internship coordinator, that the student meets with me, and that we might start off by doing some job shadowing or maybe some inventories if they really don't know what where their interests lie. And then meeting with the potential internship mentor is an important step in that. So we would meet collaboratively, and once that internship site has been identified, we would meet collaboratively and really talk about the goals for both the student and for the mentor, and develop an internship plan, which is then kept in a folder and in a Google folder that can be accessed by myself and their mentor. The final step is combining the student intern with also the content area teacher. So again, we're talking about proficiencies and how we're going to align those indicators with what they're learning at the internship site, and then to develop an assessment process, and looking at rubrics to making sure that their internship skills and knowledge is aligning with what we've got listed in the proficiencies for that content area. So we meet with them regularly. The content area teacher, I'm also, as the coordinator, getting feedback from their mentor and doing site visits. So next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit more of an image of what this might look like, I've included two examples. One is from a current student, and Emma secured an internship through the Rubenstein lab at UVM, where scientists are studying ecology in various watersheds across the state. So her goal is to learn how to identify and categorize zooplankton. Just in case you don't know what zooplankton is, it's there in the bottom left-hand corner, because I definitely had to look. It's usually located at the surface of water. And using the technology they have available at the lab, she's able to categorize them. So she's working with her mentor to create a final presentation for UVM Science Fair that summarizes their research. So she meets with the biology teacher here at Harwood on a regular basis to talk about the science proficiencies she's addressing. She's also documenting all of her learning in a Google Doc. And again, I'm getting feedback from her mentor, and we'll be doing a site visit actually really soon here. And the next example I have right next to that is a student that I worked with who loved to watch YouTube videos of really loud cars, and it really, it excited him and interested him, but he really didn't have any experience working in auto mechanics, and unfortunately he wasn't accepted into the CTE program we have here. So we looked at internships, and his goal was really to learn more about the basics of auto mechanics. So we worked collaboratively with a physics teacher and a math teacher, and he was able to identify proficiencies within those two core content areas to work towards building a business plan using personal finance standards, and also to describe and basically put a project together describing the physics of motors. So those were his final projects in the end, and you know, great story for him. He was able to move on to UTI in Norwood, Massachusetts. So that's a little bit about internship. If we move on to the next slide, Ellen will talk to us a little bit about independent studies. So one of the offerings that we have for independent studies is to connect community-based experiences in an independent study format. And not all independent studies are community-based with, you know, in connections with mentors in the community. But we do offer this for students. So what the big elements of our ingredients are very similar to the internship, as you'll notice from our ingredient list, is definitely an interested student and a student who is engaged in a way that they can be pretty self-directed, because a lot of the work falls on them. They work with me or another teacher in Next Step in order to design their proposal for an internship, for an independent study. And then then they work with their community-based mentor to kind of talk about how the study with them is going to connect with their designed plan in school. Once they've created the proposal, we then share it with the content area teacher that is designated for that student. So if it's a student who is interested in something that is art-based, we connect them with the teacher that is designated as the flexible pathway teacher in art, and that student then writes a plan that connects the defined proficiencies and performance indicators with the learning that they're intending to do in the independent study. And then they also create the ability to assess the student's learning, and so they need to create some assessment products that the teacher will be able to look at and then compare to a rubric that's designed by the student and the teacher that specifically targets the performance indicators within our graduation proficiencies, so that they're able to be really clear about their performance and at least attaining a level of proficient, so that it is demonstrated for their ongoing transcript here. Students need time to be able to work on this study, and I think that's an important conversation that we have is when do you intend to be able to work on this study? Because sometimes I'll have a student come to me and they're in sports and they have a full schedule and they work, and we really talk about making sure that they're not overcommitting themselves. So we really try to encourage students to really think about how they're going to incorporate this in their time. One of the pieces that Rachel kind of underscored is that transportation is sometimes a component of this, and so really helping students determine a transportation plan to be able to get to that community site where they might be doing this independent study. It requires ongoing reflection and assessment on the part of the student, and they need to meet with the content area teacher at least 3 times to be assessed. In the end, they present their final evidence to their mentor and to their content area teacher, and then they also evaluate their own performance, and that determines their overall performance in the study. So next slide, please. So when you think about this, you know, we have to mix the student with that next step teacher, and that next step teacher really kind of guides the whole process along the way. One of the other roles that we play within this is to remind students and teachers when it's time to be able to connect with one another along the way in the study. So we really kind of serve as that kind of 20,000 foot once the student starts working on the study to be able to make sure that all of the pieces are working together. And then it's really important that the student and the content area teacher are able to meet and discuss the student's learning. The other piece is to be able to design any processes in case the student is coming against any obstacles. And so the content area teacher or someone within the Next Step program can support that student in dealing with any obstacles, as well as working with that site mentor. And then the student is also meeting with their site mentor regularly. And you know, the time based on this, we're no longer kind of tied to time. It really is about the student determining what that level of performance is in concert with the content teacher and the community mentor. And I think that's kind of the glory of a proficiency-based system, is we're no longer tied to hours, we're tied to performance. Next slide, please. So we've provided here a couple of examples. We have 3 examples of 3 different types of studies. We had a student this year who has her own graphic design business, and she's designing her own unique designs that can be put on different types of products and sold. And so she is working with our art teacher, and she is working on design and self-direction performance indicators. So she's receiving, you know, recognition in art and self-direction, which is one of our graduation expectations here. We also had a student last year who worked as a ski instructor intern at Sugarbush. And so she was able to develop a study that aligned with PE and health performance indicators, and it was able to meet one PE experience towards graduation, because we also have that expectation for students, and she worked with a PE endorsed teacher to do this. This year we have a student who came to us, and this was really unique. She was interested in exploring medical jobs, but really wanted to determine how it aligned with different science learning expectations. And so we partnered with our science endorsed teacher, who's aligned with the flexible pathways, and she's aligning job shadows that she's working with Rachel to be able to organize in the community and develop the learning in the science area while she does some research around the science that's necessary for that study. So all 3 really different kinds of experiences. Next slide, please. We've also embedded in this presentation our folders and forms, and we welcome folks to feel free to use them, look at them, feel free to ask us any questions about them, and certainly if you make improvements on them, we'd love to hear what you do, because we know that we all learn from each other. So please feel free to use these forums and to let us know how they work or don't work for you. Next slide, please. And now your questions. We'd love to hear your questions.
So there's a question about internships. Does Harwood provide a small stipend for teachers who were involved in providing service to students?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. It relates to internships. Does Harwood provide a small stipend to content teachers who provide services to students?
The content-related teachers who are supporting students in either in their internships or independent studies, it's actually considered a prep. So they don't receive any additional funds for that. It's a prep for their day.
How often are you observing students in their work-based placements?
Well, I'm going to physical sites probably about anywhere from usually 3 to 4 times per year, I would say, depending on how, we've got some students who are just doing it for a semester, so I might not be there 4 times, but I like to do if they're doing a full year internship once a quarter.
And are there ways to dovetail and or bridge work-based learning experiences with the services of Oak Rehab so that supports continue into the summer and beyond graduation?
Absolutely. I mean, we work very closely with folks from Vermont, from Voc Rehab. And so students can continue on with their internships. However, if students are in internships and they're earning, they're adjusting proficiencies or earning credit through us, it's important that that there is an ending date in mind, so we don't have an employer who's taking advantage of a student who's not getting paid for their work, because we want it to be a learning experience and not one in which the employer is getting more out of the experience than the student is.
Great. And I have one last question for you. How are graduation requirements reported out on transcripts?
Okay, I'll hand that over to Ellen. And the question?
How are graduation requirements reported out on transcripts?
Oh, great question. So the content area teacher, we use a Jump Rope as our grade-based reporting system. So the content-based teacher will have a spot in their grade book for any of the independent study or internship students that they work with in their content area. And it also kind of reflects one of the things that Ken talked about in terms of the teachers that are assigned to this flexible pathway duty. It's really helpful because it also helps to determine the additional numbers of students with whom they're engaged. So it does fall under their assigned duties, if that makes any sense.
Great. We just want to thank Ellen and Rachel and Ken for sharing their effective practices with us today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Veronica.
Great, thanks, Michael. And thanks again, Ellen, Rachel, and Ken. Those presentations were terrific. And also as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so we will be sending a link that will include the slides and also will provide you access to the information that Rachel and Ellen embedded into this presentation today. So now we're going to switch a little bit over to start thinking about the upcoming March sessions. And what we would like you to do is we're going to provide you with like around 3 to 5 minutes to just type in questions that you have, potential questions that you would like to bring forward to either Department of Labor personnel and or potential employers within the state of Vermont around building and sustaining relationships, education workforce relationships, as well as just any needs or wants that you might have heard or that you have on your end with regards to employers, or what you think their needs are and how we can work on continuing this collaborative effort as we are developing and strengthening our work-based learning programs, both in schools and on site. And so during this time, these questions are going to be recorded, and then I'm going to generate a list, and we will be sending them forward to the folks that are presenting during the March sessions. And so let's see here. Thank you, Michael, for the next slide. So we're interested in hearing from you about the questions you're most interested in discussing. So we just want to give a couple of minutes just to jot down any questions you currently have. Maybe anything that you've come across during placements along the way with regards to employer and educator relationships, or any questions you might have with regards to the Department of Labor laws or hour and wage practices. And we're going to give you some time to just jot this down. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left here, and if you do have any additional questions that you come up with, please feel free to send them along my way. Michael, could you go to the next slide? Thanks.
So we want to thank everyone for coming today. We want to remind you that there will be another webinar next Thursday, and you're most welcome to join us. The topics are shared on the slides. In addition, we want to remind you that the work that we started today is going to help us in preparing for our regional meetings with employers to discuss the relationships that we're having with them. The Southern meeting will be held on March 1st at the Franklin Center at the Howe in Rutland. And our meeting in the North will be March 8th at the Holiday Inn Burlington. And then at the final session will be whole group in June, and that will be an opportunity for us all to share what our learnings and reflections are over the year. We'll be providing structured ways of having conversations with one another, and we'll be talking with you in more detail at our March sessions about what that'll look like. Again, we'd like to thank our presenters for being here today. We're providing their email addresses as well as the email address for Veronica and me. And we'd also like to thank the people behind the scenes who've been helping us with our work.
And also a big thank you to, once again, to Ken, Ellen, and Rachel. And a big thanks to all of the participants and sending forward your great questions. And if you do have any additional questions, either about today's presentations or questions that you would like to see brought forward during the March meetings, please feel free to email them to either myself and or Michael. And also just another reminder, please feel free to tune into our second webinar, which is next Wednesday, January 31st at 9 a.m. And once again, we will be sending the recorded links out to the Work-Based Learning Collaborative Code. Thanks again.
And just as a reminder about other upcoming events, there will be national speakers coming to Vermont to talk with you about your work. Andrew Hargreaves will be focusing on the power of collaboration and the impact that has on the implementation of education quality standards. That will be on April 10th and June 19th of this year. And Alvin Zamuda will be talking about personalized learning May 2nd and 3rd. All these series will be held at the Lake Moray Resort, and we'll be sending information to you through another communication. On behalf of the Vermont Professional Learning Network and the Personalized Learning team at the AOE, thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at future events.